Theological Society events, and we're absolutely delighted to have the big long string of titles coming up. The Reverend Canon Dr. Manon James, who is Director of Initial Ministerial Education at St Padars, who's going to talk to us tonight about humour, and we all need more of that in the church. So without more ado, hand over to Manon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you. So it's lovely to be here, and as you can see, I've put some nice pictures of happy people to begin the presentation. And welcome to also to the people joining us on the live stream. I think my mum and dad probably. I'm not sure about anybody else. So I've got two stories from the last couple of weeks about laughter, but I just wanted you to think for a second about when did you have a last belly laugh and what was the occasion? So as I tell you about my two stories, then perhaps you can have a think about yours. So my first story is me and, well, I've kind of called it IT account hell. So essentially, I work on a very, very part-time basis for Trinity St David as part of my job for St Padans. So they, in their wisdom, have created two accounts for me by mistake, so I can't get into either. So I phoned the man on the other end of the phone. I couldn't get a phone number to begin with, you know how it is, but after about 2 weeks, I tracked down a phone number and I was talking to this person. And actually, he found out they have created two accounts for me. So finally, we get rid of one account and everything's going smoothly. But by then, Trinity St David had brought in a new rule, which is that you can't access anything to do with their accounts on your own machine. So all this happened in the middle of them trying to sort out my accounts. They haven't given me a laptop, have they? Because I'm very, very part-time for them. So I rang this poor man up and I was telling him, look, I can't get in. And he said, oh yes, we've just bought in this new thing that you can't access any of our accounts now unless you register your machine with us. And I said, great, how do I do that? And he said, well, if you go online and get into your account, there'll be a list there of what you should do. And of course, I said to him, well, look, how on earth am I going to do that? Because I can't get into my account. So he just laughed. And I'm sure that he doesn't have a lot of joy in his life, this poor man from IT, but he laughed. And then he said, and I thought this was quite profound actually, he said, I'm not laughing at you, because he was just worried that I would be worried that he was just taking the mickey out of me. So that's one story about laughter and the part it played in my life in the last week or so. This is my other story, so I'm going to read this out. So I've had permission to share this story. So I listened to a podcast called, sorry, my microphone etiquette. I follow this podcast called The Socially Distanced Sports Bar. And essentially, it's a podcast, it's a Welsh podcast about Welsh sports. But 2 out of the 3 people who run it are comedians, and actually, it's a very funny podcast. So on the Facebook group, this guy called Kevin Duffield, and as I said, he's given me permission to share this story. His wife had been seriously ill for quite a number of years, and she got sepsis and she died. And he said this: to Steph, Mike and Ellis, thank you. The last 14 months in particular have been the most challenging that I can imagine. The reliable couple of hours-ish per week where I knew I could escape and would undoubtedly be aching afterwards from laughing has helped so much to get me through this time. It gave me a reliable milestone in my week where for a very short time I could embrace the power of laughter. Even today, the day after Ruth's funeral, the only time I've not felt the darkness is when belly laughing at today's episode. I know others have said this, but what you guys do is so much more than just a podcast. Hug your loved ones, everyone. And I thought that was just, again, it's encapsulated for me how very important laughter is in our lives, because it really does make life worth living. So how about you then? We're going to have a Q&A at the end where we're not live streaming it, but It is being live streamed now, remember? So when did you laugh in the last couple of weeks, and what did that laughter mean, do you think? Oh,
Do inductions in the prison, and you go around, and I usually have a look down the list, and if there are Christians, I take a New Testament with me to give to the Christians. And I was going around happily giving out these New Testaments, and then somebody sort of pulled me up and said, "Don't think you're being very helpful. They were all Welsh New Testaments."
well, they didn't speak Welsh.
And there was no one speaking Welsh.
Anyone else with a story what they laughed about in the last couple of weeks? I saw the two of you look at each other.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm a big fan of One Foot in the Grave, actually. It's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. But one of my favourite episodes is when Victor is listening to something on his headphones. Do you remember the one I mean? And Mrs. Walboys is telling a very sad story, and every time she comes to something really sad, he laughs his head off because he's listening at a comedy on headphones. Yeah. So laughter plays, I would say, a very, very important part in our lives. And I'm going to just explain really, or I'm going to explore with you theologically what that might mean for all of us, really. So just to explain a little bit about what my own interest is. So I actually believe the laughter and comedy and jokes, it's really important in our daily lives. And it made me want to kind of explore this a bit more. So what I've done is I've actually written, in the end, 3 chapters that will come out at some stage or other in edited books. And if you're interested in asking about any of these at the end, then I'm very happy to talk about it. But there's a book coming out called Religion and Senses of Humour. And I've written a chapter on the comedian Stuart Lee for that. I've also written a chapter on humour, theology, and pastoral care, which is kind of similar to what I'm going to be talking about tonight, really, in a book called Future Faith, which is coming out hopefully in December. And also, I don't know, is anybody here a fan of The American Office? No, well, if you're bored and have a couple of evenings, I really do suggest that you watch that. Well, there are 8, 9 series. It's great actually. But there are 2 episodes. One called Diversity Day, which is about training, because Michael, who's the boss, he said some very racially insensitive things. So it's racism awareness training. And then sexual harassment, which is about sexual harassment training they had in the office in this show. And I'm arguing there because the guy who's the lead actor, his name's gone out of my head, of course. He argues that you couldn't make these shows anymore because we don't joke about these things. But actually, I'm arguing that you can joke about these things as long as you're sensitive about doing it. So that's that 3rd chapter. Steve Carell, that's his name. So why is this topic important? So I think on a theological basis, I think looking at things like joy and praise and laughter is really important because it's very much part of life and very much part of our faith and part of who we are as Christians. But I also think it's a very significant political topic as well, and we'll explore that a bit later on because, you know, you've heard of cancel culture, you've heard of lots of people who've told jokes that have been unwise, and there's been a big hoo-ha about it. And very often as Christians, you see, we don't get to get involved in the debates, and people think that as Christians that we have nothing to say. But I actually think we need to be involved in these debates as Christians because, who else but us has a grasp of ethics, a love of people. If we don't get involved in these debates, then the debate is going to be very much the poorer for it. So, you see, we all make a choice, don't we? So in real life, there are things that you will find funny, and you will all have a different sense of humour. Some of you will have, a dry sense of humour. Some of you will have a sense of humour that's, I don't know, crude or whatever. We all have a very different sense of humour, but we make choices, don't we, about what we laugh about. So, imagine that you're in with a group of friends having a meal, and somebody makes a joke, and you think that it's a bit mean. Do you laugh? Do you go along with it? People can make a racist joke, a sexist joke. Would you laugh at that? Every day we're sort of confronted with these choices. And I suppose what I would say as well is that, yes, there is a line for all of us, but it's really important that as Christians, that it's not just about saying no and about being joyless, but actually making ethical decisions, even about comedy and what we laugh about. So I like this quote, and this is from Stephen Patterson. Laughter is one of the things which makes life worth living, as it helps build rapport between people. It makes difficult situations bearable and can also lift us out of ourselves, and even seem almost like a holy or religious experience. So what some of the laughter theorists say is that actually when we laugh, we forget ourselves. We're sort of caught in a limbo, in a kind of no person's land in a way. And isn't that a bit like being caught up, losing ourselves? Isn't that being selfless? Isn't that an important part of being a Christian? So I think that's why he's arguing that it can almost be a holy experience. But it's also complex as well. So what Stephen Patterson argues is that within pastoral care, we have to be careful, because when people are laughing, it's not necessarily because they're finding something funny. People can laugh because they feel embarrassed. People can laugh because they feel a sense of shame. I don't know how many of you, if you're responsible for taking weddings, have done a wedding rehearsal, and the night before, say, somebody gets married, the couple before you are either in tears or they're laughing because they just find it so embarrassing. So laughter doesn't really mean always that people find something funny. Laughter can mean all kinds of things. So I've been talking about the line and the boundary, and I think this is a very interesting way of entering into what laughter and what comedy is all about. So another humour theorist, Bernard Schweitzer, he talks about the liminality of humour. He says that humour can shift the boundary, but more commonly it exposes the existence of a boundary. The technical term to refer to such an involvement with boundaries is liminality. It playfully reevaluates questions and inspects borders, whether they are set by authorities, opinion makers, traditions, creeds, or psychological needs. So the interesting thing about laughter and what we find funny is that it sort of helps us see that there is a boundary there. And I think with things that are genuinely funny, we have to go quite close to the boundary, actually, for it to be genuinely funny. And that's always where the risk comes. So in short then, laughter and humour is an in-between place where we momentarily forget ourselves. It's something that's playful, and as I said, we can go quite close to the line, but then we have to be careful not to go over it. What I find funny as well is generally something that's very true, and perhaps the truth that we find it difficult to acknowledge between each other. but actually in laughter and in joking we can acknowledge. And actually, a lot of it is play, isn't it? When you think about, well, One Foot in the Grave, for example, a lot of it is very silly, isn't it? One Foot in the Grave. And there's a lot of kind of playfulness and the surreal to do with humour as well. And some people love that kind of humour, don't they, where things are very, very, very strange. So according to people who write about these things, this is what humour does. So humour builds rapport and creates bonds between people. So Michael, you were talking about the prison there. I'm sure that they were kind of teasing you, weren't they? Because you were giving out the wrong Bibles to people. But you knew that they weren't being unkind. They were being playful and affectionate, weren't they? Yeah, yeah. So there is a lovely sense of rapport with humour that helps build people and build bonds and kind of create community. And also it can create culture as well. It's sort of what people laugh about in a group. It really does sort of, that's what the culture is about, isn't it? It says a lot about a culture, and a sociologist or a anthropologist would have a field day, wouldn't they, if they kind of explored what our humour was about. But humour also can be quite dangerous because it can be used to exclude people as well in jokes, this kind of thing. But as I've been exploring now, humour is a lot to do with catharsis, isn't it? A kind of, just like crying is catharsis, so is laughing as well. So when I looked into humour a bit more, I was quite fascinated actually to find out some of these things. So first of all, we will know, won't we, that different cultures have their own different norms about what is suitable humour and the types of situations where we're able to laugh. But actually, Rod Martin, who's a psychologist, he argues that laughter is indistinguishable between one culture and another. Laughter is the same kind of noises and same sounds. I suppose we all know of different people who'll have different laughs, but different, it's not as though different cultures have different types of laughter. We all laugh the same. And actually, they think that laughter is something that's innate to all of us. So all cultures laugh. It's an innate part of being human. We don't learn to laugh. Laughter is something that we do. So even children who are born deaf and blind laugh, even though they've never seen or heard other people laugh. The other interesting thing I think about humour that we don't think about enough is that people are actually judged on their humour. So, back in the day, I suppose you'd hear, these adverts about, if you're looking for a date, GSOH, isn't a good sense of humour. We all want to be with people who we think have a good sense of humour. I think the worst thing you can perhaps say about somebody is that they don't have a sense of humour. And there are some people, aren't there, who are like that. And you kind of think, oh, what is it about this person? Perhaps I can't bond with them. Ah, yes. They don't really have a sense of humour, or they don't have my sense of humour. But it's also interesting to think about what humour does as well, is that it helps our well-being, as we've explored, but it also does more for our brains. It sort of helps our intellectual flexibility and helps us process things as well. So it's got a very, very important function in our lives. And again, this is from the same book, The Psychology of Humour. So what Rod Martin is saying is that different people have seen laughter in different ways over the years. So initially, especially in the ancient world, people would see laughter as fundamentally aggressive, which is interesting, isn't it? Like we think of laughter as kind of building a rapport and having fun with people, but actually, up until a couple of centuries ago, people actually thought the laughter was aggressive, mocking, looking down on people. But also, for a catharsis, a way of coping with suffering, or playing with boundaries or with taboos. So I think all those things are true, actually. I think laughter is a very wide thing, and it plays a very lots of different parts in our lives, really, even wider than crying, maybe. So if we look at theology and humour, I'm going back again to Stephen Patterson, and he wrote this book called A Critique of, what it's called now, it's on my list, Critique of Pastoral Care. And he had this chapter in it that talked about the importance of humour, and he was saying that actually not many theologians have kind of looked into this. His book is about 20, 30 years old, and it's true. It's still true. Not many theologians have looked into it. So Reinhold Niebuhr talks about humour, but not in any great deal. As Patterson says, it's only in him that we find anything like a detailed theological assessment of humour and laughter. And his argument, Stephen Patterson's argument, is that because as Christians we've historically had a very kind of suspicious view of the body and not really been people who like the body or think of ourselves as embodied, because we have this kind of separation between the spirit and the body, and we think the body is bad, but the spirit is good. So because we kind of mistrust our bodies and aren't very at home in our bodies, maybe, that's something like laughter, which is very visceral, which is very embodied, that we're quite suspicious of it, and we prefer the spiritual and the intellectual. So other theologians have argued about the importance of laughter. So I hope you like my little joke there. This is about mansplaining, isn't it? Let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence. So Jacqueline Bussey has written this book called Laughter But From Below, and her argument is that laughter actually is very, very powerful because it's empowering for people who've got very little power. And she argues that, well, I suppose up until this last century, theology has been the domain of men mainly, and they're not very interested in looking at humour and laughter because it's sort of it challenges the norms and it's very countercultural. And as she says, if theology has been written by powerful men, then powerful men find laughter intimidating because it's the kind of last thing that we can do if we feel oppressed and we don't feel that we've got a voice. Laughter actually is quite empowering in those situations. So how are we doing so far? Got any questions about what I've been saying so far? So I suppose what I've been trying to set up as well is this idea that we've got a kind of a certain kind of Christianity which has, I suppose, been quite straight-laced, been quite spiritual. And what you've got here is Roger Hayden Mitchell, and in his work, he would argue that there have been historically two types of Christianity that have sort of been evidence really throughout the world. So you've got the Christianity there, that's the picture of Julian Norwich. You've got the Christianity of the mystics, of the saints, or some of the saints, the people who had direct access to God, the writers, and who would talk about their relationships with God. Then you've got the Christianity of Christendom, which is very hierarchical, very kind of ordered, very authoritarian. So, this sort of ways of looking at Christianity, that there are two types, is perhaps very simplistic, but I think it's quite a helpful way of helping us understand the role of humour and laughter really within the Christian tradition. So I suppose the argument would be that this sort of more mysticism type Christianity, which is not hierarchical, which isn't about order and roles, is this Christianity that has more of a direct access to God, where people experience God, ordinary people. But that's the Christianity that's more into laughter and things which aren't just spiritual and intellectual. So in the Christian tradition, you've got people like John Chrysostom who said that Jesus never laughed. So quoting that Jesus wept, but he didn't laugh. So that's why we shouldn't laugh. You've also got one of the rules in Benedict's rule that monks should weep and not laugh. So you have got a bit of a streak in Christianity that's been promoting a kind of a seriousness rather than laughter. Sorry, this is a very broad brush, but you've also then got another kind of Christianity. And when I was researching this, I was quite taken actually with all the kind of different types of Christianity there have been that have really engaged with the idea of laughter. So first of all, have you heard of the idea of Easter laughter? So I'll talk about that in the next slide. But the idea of Easter laughter, and I suppose you've heard of the Holy Fools a bit more, perhaps. Is Holy Fools something you've heard of? Yeah. So these people have been writing about this countercultural kind of Christianity, and one of them would be Mikhail Bakhtin, who would say that laughter and carnival in the medieval time was kind of a countercultural and was an important satirical critique of the church's power. So again, this kind of countercultural Christianity that was actually trying to make the point that Christianity wasn't just this ordered spiritual thing, but an embodied visceral experience. So Easter laughter, it's not something that we would have come across in the UK, but apparently it's sort of a German tradition and a Slavic tradition. So German priests at the Easter Mass, apparently, they would think it was important to crack jokes, make innuendos. So can you imagine that if you went to church on Easter morning, instead of being given an Easter egg, the priest would be making the most bizarre innuendos, trying to make you laugh. And again, as it says there, the Greek Orthodox and Slavic traditions, this wasn't to do with Easter Day, but it was to do with Easter Monday, where people would come together and share jokes, and that was part of their tradition. So I got a quote there that explains it, because, you know, the resurrection was seen as a big joke because Jesus overturned life on its head. So it was important to celebrate that by sort of having wild laughter and having fun. So it's about Jesus' resurrection being very topsy-turvy and sort of turning everything we know on its head. Now, the Holy Fools, which is something I want to learn a little bit more about, actually, I would say comes through a little bit in the medieval Western church, but mainly in the early church. So you've got this guy here, Simeon of Edessa, who was a healer and you know, very kind of esteemed, especially after his death. But his idea was about being a fool for Christ. And, you know, in those words of Paul, that actually, if you were a saint, you didn't want to be revered and treated seriously. You actually wanted people to think badly of you because, you know, you didn't want people to be thinking of you and looking at you. So here are some of these things that he did. So he would take his dead dog for a walk. So that's a picture of him there with his dead dog. And he would run into church and throw nuts at the priest and run away again. So this idea was that he was mad. As I said, you know, foolishness for Christ and this kind of thing as well. But this sort of idea that he didn't really want people to think highly of him as a person, so he could do all these good deeds under cover of being mad, so he wouldn't be revered. He'd be pointing to Christ. But there is a sense in which this sort of holy fool tradition is again satirizing power and the church's power, and is countercultural. And there's a little bit of this tradition as well, in, you know, people dressing up as monks and priests and bishops and things. You know, we have this today, which I suppose is part of that tradition. You know, when children come into churches and get shown round, and have an experience of what church is like. We dress them up as little priests and things, or you have people who can be a bishop for the day, children who can be a bishop for the day. That's sort of part of that sort of playful tradition in a sense. That's the Holy Fool tradition. So the Bible and humour. So before we go on, don't look at that, avert your eyes from my PowerPoint. Do you think the Bible is for or against laughter? For. So why is it? Why would you say that? Yeah, go on. Can you think of one? No. Hmm.
Goes into the prayer meeting where they're all praying for Peter for good reason. But it's like, it's funny.
Yeah.
There's lots.
And it's really helpful to see these stories through the lens of them being funny, isn't it, rather than deadly serious. No, exactly. Anyone else want to make an argument for the Bible saying that it's okay to laugh, things to be funny? Yeah, because I don't know about you, but when I sit in church sometimes and I hear a Bible reading and it's just funny, I do want to laugh, but it's difficult to, isn't it? Because we're all so very serious. Yeah. No, I'm with you, the both of you. So I think that even though obviously the books of the Bible are written in a very different time from ours, so we do get a lot of laughter, which is mocking in the Bible. So, Psalm 2, Psalm 37, we get the soldiers laughing at Jesus. So, as I was arguing before, there was laughter in the ancient world was seen as an aggressive thing. And we do get that in the Bible as well. But Psalm 126, laughter is seen as part of joy and joyful laughter. And I would also argue, moving on to the next page, that Jesus's parables, especially, and Jesus's life, if we don't look at the stories about Jesus and the stories that Jesus told, if we don't look at them through the eyes of comedy and laughter, then we're missing a whole load of things that I think that Jesus was trying to say. So some of the writers writing about theology and laughter agree with us. So Crucial talks about a warm current of messianic joy throughout the Gospels. Fry talks about the gentle, life-affirming humour of the parables. And to be honest with you, they're not that gentle sometimes, are they? Yes, definitely. No, I agree with you. And I think he uses a lot of techniques of comedy, doesn't he, and jokes. So exaggeration, if we're reading about, entering the kingdom of God like a camel through the eye of a needle, how many sermons have you heard about, oh, well, the eye of a needle was this gate, da, 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 da. Do we really believe that Jesus was saying literally this, even if you could find a gate that was called the Needle or the Eye of the Needle or whatever. It was a joke, wasn't it? It was an exaggeration to make a point. And because Christians, we can be so serious, can't we? There is no Christian group, as far as I know, that has taken Jesus seriously and started to chop bits of themselves off. But Jesus said, if part of your body causes you to sin, chop it off. Well, obviously he didn't mean that, did he? It was sort of a joke, not a very gentle joke, but it was an exaggeration. So I think if we can read a lot of what Jesus said as an exaggeration to make a point, that helps us understand it a lot better. Casting your pearls before swine, mustard seed, and this kind of thing. And I was even reading, somebody was arguing that Jesus had a sarcastic sense of humour. And I suppose it's difficult for us to think of Jesus as sarcastic because we think of sarcastic as a negative thing, don't we? But, some of the things he said about the Pharisees was quite dry and sarcastic, really, wasn't it? It was sort of quite biting. And also the kind of play with people's names. So I think that calling Peter or calling Simon Peter the Rock is a bit of a joke, isn't it? Because in some ways, this man was the least rock-like person in Jesus' life. But then he became the rock, didn't he? So in a sense, the joke became the reality. So again, I do think that, in answer to the question, was Jesus funny? I think I would say yes. And likewise, this writer called Terry Lindwall, he also argues that the prophets in the Old Testament, they were the satirists of their day as well, using holy wit to express their prophetic challenge. So that's in essence my argument about that it's okay to laugh, and that laughter is very important within the Christian life. I want to kind of situate this now against the sort of more current situations and what's going on today. So I would say the debates about Christianity and humour, it is situated, isn't it, against the wider debates about power, control, hierarchy, and church structures. Because as I said, laughter and joking is countercultural. And it is about embodiment and control, and even sexuality, because laughter is like a physical experience. As I said, laughter is an embodied experience. Who remembers this lady? So in a sense, this is the reputation that we have as Christians, isn't it? Is that we're against everything. But as I kind of come into land in the next kind of 5 or 10 minutes, I want to argue that really we need to get involved in these debates and not just say no. So the final theologian I want to bring in really is a woman called Courtney Goto, and she's American, and she has written this book called The Grace of Playing. And her argument in her book is that actually play is very important for us as Christians. And she talks about the kingdom of God, although she would call it God's new creation, as being a place where play is really crucial. Because, if we believe as Christians that the kingdom of God is here as well as to come, then the kingdom of God is a playful place. And in a sense, we experience some of that in worship, don't we? Where even in our traditions of times and seasons, it's about playing, isn't it? We dress up, or children dress up for the nativity and pretend that we're Mary and Joseph. We pretend that the cross of Jesus is there on Good Friday and that we're entering into the crucifixion as well. We enter into Easter. We hear the stories about Pentecost and we imagine what it would be like. And we everywhere is the priest wears red to symbolize the tongues of fire. So lots of what we do in liturgy is play in essence. And then this quote really is about saying that in play is very serious because we can actually be something else, and we can explore and be part of a different world. And then she also talks about the importance of hope. It's a great meme, that, isn't it? So she argues that in worship, we are decentered from life as usual and the ways that our worlds have deformed us, on grounds that allow playing the faithful find support for becoming more than we thought possible or could manage alone. We are summoned by hope to greater possibilities. So if we imagine ourselves as Christians as part of this world, but we're also part of God's kingdom now, it's like a playful place where we can reimagine and rethink what our lives could be about. So, by tapping into our imagination, then we're able to imagine life as different and not allow maybe our society to shape us so much by what our society wants us to be like. We can be who God is calling us to be. So the importance of laughter, I'm arguing that it creates rapport and sets a joyful tone. It brings freedom and flourishing and catharsis, and it challenges power even in the church as well as in public life and in politics. I want to think quickly, what do we learn from comedians? So I don't know, does anybody here have a favourite sort of stand-up comedian that you like? Yes. Because it's true, yeah, yeah. Yes, yeah, I agree. Anyone else with a favourite stand-up? Oh, yeah, yes, yes. Well, and Walkham and Wise and Victoria Wood, there's kind of an innocence about them, isn't there? And also there's a kind of an edge as well, isn't there? Which makes them funny as well. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I did a 2-hour comedy course, a stand-up comedy course, because I was bored one weekend. And I learned a lot through doing that. And since then, I've done about 6 or 7 stand-up sets, just to kind of push myself and make myself scared, really, because it's very scary doing it, and trying something new. But I learned something that was really, really different and really shocked me about stand-up comedy, and it was this. So this is from Judy Carter, and she said that one of the biggest mistakes beginners make going on stage as a character. Many comics don a facade out of fear of being vulnerable in front of an audience, or they fear being boring, so they develop a funny character. The problem is that effort goes against the core of what makes stand-up entertaining, the authenticity and relatability of the material. Your persona is or will be you. And that was one of the things that we were taught in this 2-hour course. What is the unique thing that makes you you? What's funny about you? Don't take on a persona, because that's not going to be as funny. What is it about you that makes you uniquely funny? And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And I suppose that's where the word vocation in my talk comes into this, because I think it's true as well that in terms of our own discipleship and ministry, that we're not called to be somebody else. We are actually all called to be us, authentically us. And that's what God is calling us to be. And I found that just astonishing, really, because I would have assumed that in stand-up comedy, you'd have to kind of be somebody else. But actually, the funniest people are people who are truly themselves. And it's true about any art in any sense, isn't it? Any writing. The best writers are uniquely themselves. They're not sort of pretending to be anybody else. So I think there are things that we in the church can learn from stand-up comedy. So this is what I learned, that you have to make people laugh every 10 seconds. He can do that, can't he? Yeah, it's incredible. And do you think the material is very ordinary, and then he just brings it to life, isn't he? But you know, people tell us that people don't want to listen to people talking anymore. So, you know, keep your sermons short, you know, have different images. But actually, in stand-up comedy, people can hold your attention for like an hour, and it's something to do with this. I know in a sermon, it'd be very difficult to do like a joke every 10 seconds. But it's about keeping people's interest, isn't it? Every 10 seconds. And things like good writing and good delivery is really important, the authenticity, as I said. But stand-up and sermons are two different genres, but I think I would find it impossible. But there must be people out there who would be able to craft a sermon that was also a stand-up set. So I think that's the next thing that the church should attempt. So I'm sort of coming into land now in a way. I want to kind of think about really the line, you know. So this paragraph here is about, you know, some people argue that if a joke is genuinely funny, then it doesn't matter if it causes offence. But the problem is, you know, who decides what is offensive and what isn't? And I think it's really important for us as Christians, as I said, that we enter into these debates about what is funny and what is actually offensive. You know, you've all heard of cancel culture, haven't you? So the wrong joke said in the wrong place can actually ruin somebody's career, can't it? You know, with the Charlie Hebdo attack, it can lead to death even, and terrorism. So offence, jokes, you know, all this isn't just like a pleasant thing for us to think about. It's actually a really important aspect of our political life. So these are some of the jokes or some of the stories that I came across. I just did a Google news and jokes, and this is what came up. You know, people apologising for jokes. So they're both from June. This happened today. You know, Jack Black, the actor and the musician, somebody who was on tour with them made a joke about Trump's assassination, and he's had to cancel his because there was so much fuss, and of course it was slightly too soon, isn't it, to make these jokes. He's had to cancel his tour because there's been so much of a hoo-ha about it, and that's just happened today. Then here are some of the jokes that have got people into trouble. So the book Jubilate by Hardy and Ford, they're quite similar to the Easter laughter, really. They talk about the basic Christian existence as a laugh. And they talk about the resurrection of Jesus as a laugh freed forever and ever. Does God like to see us laughing? Well, Rod Martin, again, our friend who's the psychologist, he talks about humour as not just amusement, mirth and hilarity, but he refers to Thomas Hobbes, who called it a sudden glory. You know, so I would agree really that laughter, we sort of have that, it's a pleasant feeling, but it also is very similar, I think, to joy. Then bringing the threads together, I think humour leads us into God's new creation, God's kingdom. It's a space to turn power and hierarchy upside down. It's a liminal space, and it's a space to play with catharsis, with boundaries and taboos, and it's a space to be ourselves. I would say, do use humour in church life. The best PCCs I've been to have been PCCs which have had a good chair who likes to have a bit of a joke and But we do need to be careful, don't we? Because different people do have a different line. You know, we've all been in situations where we've caused needless offence. And I think it's about building relationships rather than destroying relationships. So in terms of making jokes, it's about jokes that build the community rather than destroy the community, isn't it? And then finally, how can we contribute positively to current debates? I don't think there's any such thing as just a joke. You know, everything we say has a meaning, and it's more complex than that. We need to be intelligent about our joking. So for me, it's not about saying no, but it's about encouraging making good ethical decisions that build people up. You've heard the saying, haven't you, about punching up rather than punching down. And for me, good humour is not just about being clean, you know, it's not about not joking about difficult subjects or whatever, but about speaking the truth to power. And finally, it's about joy. My final slide is these books. So I'm very happy to send round the bibliography and the PowerPoint if you want it. But I think that's how I'd like to end really this part of the evening, is by stressing the importance of us as Christians getting involved in these debates, but about not being afraid of joking and playing and laughter about being joyful, and that Christianity should be about joy and praise rather than just a dry intellectualism.
Very much indeed, Manon.
Pleasure.
And thank you to everybody who's joined us online. We hope you've equally enjoyed it. We really appreciate you coming all the way to StAsaph to do this for us. For those of you who've enjoyed this evening and the last, our next StAsaph Theological Society will be on Wednesday, the 18th of September, when the Archdeacon of StAsaph, Andy, will be speaking for us. He hasn't yet given us a venue. I anticipate it being somewhere. Oh, St Anne's in Real. Oh, brilliant. So it's now confirmed, St Anne's in Real. And again, you'll be able to watch it online. But once again, thank you so much, Manon.
Pleasure.
That's brilliant.
So we've got time for questions as well. I haven't had to come all that far, you know, and I only live in Abergele. I don't know, any responses? Anything you want to disagree with me about? Or?